think it began. All right. So initially, what thing that kind of drew my attention is in the beginning of, I think, chapter 5, where the special bus is available for all the kids in the middle school to take home and later on so they can all go to the game. And I actually heard of another district that had this special bus thing so that kids could be in sports. It is in like Des Moines, but have you ever heard of another reason for having a special bus or anything like that in your districts or in other districts?
Well, my district used to bus for after school program.
So they keep a bus that would go later for those kids.
Mhm.
That's nice.
They stopped it, but they used to.
Yeah. We have a bus that goes with the football team. So like if West was playing outside of the city, they bus the fans out with them.
Do they still, even in COVID?
No, not during COVID because we're not playing football right now.
Okay.
But yep, we do have that available.
There was a whole NPR like interview with the sports director and then one of the coaches who had to develop those extra, because it was like a clear disadvantage for kids who didn't have a ride. They could never be in sports, and it was to create overcome the adversity that was like a cultural or economic barrier for them. So
I definitely got the vibe that that's how this bus worked, just because there's that separation in the book with the kids that live on the res and the kids that live, not on the reservation. So that was definitely my assumption about this bus.
Yeah. Well, they also say too, they stop at the reservation and then there's like the outliers even beyond the reservoir, wherever around the outside. So I figured it was for any kids that just lived way away to make them. I just thought it was a good thing to have so they could all feel part of the school climate, and kids love doing that stuff when they're in middle school and high school.
Right.
So I was really curious about why Anthony has stopped communicating with his 3 friends. Like, Chris is aware that Pizza's aunt resents anyone who is remotely anti-casino. And I just wondered what you thought on the take on him. Is he just throwing himself so heavily into like learning football and becoming like this great football player that he just doesn't, or does he think he's too good for the kids on the res now because he's like beyond that and he's made his chance to break away? Or, I mean, is his aunt's opinion like influencing how he's acting towards them? I just wondered if you thought.
Well, and I kind of put that in as one of my text to self connections, because like I've always been somebody that I just have like a small group of friends. Like I fit in with a lot of people and I have a lot of acquaintances, but when it comes to like friends, it's this very small group. And when I was in middle school in 5th grade, my best friend actually got really into like soccer. And so she kind of started hanging out with the soccer people. And then I didn't go with them because I wasn't into soccer like they were. So it kind of was a similar thing that happened. And I think with Pizza, I think his aunt definitely has a part in that. But I think that too, he's kind of throwing himself in with these football players to help his aunt, to kind of make his aunt happy.
So I'm just sharing your text to self connection slide right now so that we can in the video.
And I sort of wondered if it's sorry.
I just agree with Jessica and the fact that I think his aunt has an influence on his thinking. Plus, if you think about middle schoolers and how they have their friends, but then there's always like, okay, I'm not your friend today and I'm your friend tomorrow. So that could also be a part of it. And like he's becoming Mr. Popular now.
Yeah.
The big football player at school.
Or also if it's like a bit of an identity thing, right? He's this Native American kid on the football team and he's like got a chance to make it, right? He's not like super duper good. He's kind of treading water a little bit and shows promise, but I don't know. To me, it kind of feels like a little bit of a reputation thing for him that he doesn't really want to associate with the kids from the res for some reason. I hadn't even really thought as much about the aunt, although the timing with the fire and the burning of the posts kind of adds up with when he started avoiding them. But you never know with the middle schoolers.
I missed that connection the first time I read it too, and then I kind of noticed it later that his aunt resents anyone who's anti-casino, and clearly Chris going off like on it was probably pretty obviously against it.
Well, and I wonder too if maybe there's a little bit of shame with him, because a big thing that they were bringing up was the team being called the Chiefs and them doing like the tomahawk and everything.
Like guilt.
And so like he has like some shame or guilt about the fact that he is Native American and he's playing for this team that almost makes fun of his culture.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't think of that. I noticed that they make a mention of, he's reading that book so intensely, Chris sees him, and it's a book about the life of the Meskwaki Indian athlete, Jim Thorpe. Well, when I was researching Joseph Bruchak's books, just for the last project we did, it shows that he actually wrote a book about Jim Thorpe. And so did Steve Sheinkin that I read this summer. So I was like, oh, I wonder what his, compared to the book that I read, how they're different or alike. And so I wondered, that athlete is just amazing. And so I can see where like, if Pizza's reading about him, he'd want to just be more like him and he would embrace his native, self. But yes, also being like totally feeling guilty that he's on a team that mocks it.
Yeah.
But the Jim Thorpe, I had to note that reference, even though it's kind of more of a connection to something that like the author of this book is like giving a shout out to his own book. Kind of, I just thought of that. I was like, hey, he's like kind of mentioning his own book. Or maybe he just found it really interesting that Jim Thorpe was such an incredible athlete. But so
kind of reminds me of the Mo Willems books where there's always the pigeon. The pigeon always appears somewhere.
He needs to, obviously. The pigeon. So when Chris finds out that Katie is not a cheerleader, like he goes to the game with his friends and he looks over there and he sees that she's not one of them, he's like super relieved and he's like, I'm glad she's not one. I was thinking at first, I was like, well, that's kind of rude. But then I thought he's probably more relieved that she's not like doing the tomahawk chop and everything that would be associated with like cheering and pretending like you're one of the native, like mocking the native people. And it's after they get together in their class group and how she suggests that they do making mascots out of native, people and stuff. It's clear that she would never like want to be part of that. I think that's why he's more shielding her from being a cheerleader than anything. At first I was like, well, why? But what do you guys think? He's relieved.
I think he's really feeling her out in like her authenticity overall. And
right.
I got the idea that he didn't like think very highly of the cheerleaders, and he's
or the extreme fans.
Like, he's such like a soulful, wise young man. And I think he really is hoping that she meets him intellectually.
Yeah.
And I'm not making any judgments here. But this is an old book, right? Like it's from the 40s. So I think we can go with what might be inferred in this book. But I think
he's a cheerleader in high school. Be careful.
I'm being careful. He's an academic, and I just think he is hoping that she is what he's hoping she is, right? Do you guys get that vibe too? Like
I do. I
think he kind of has an idea of this sort of person, and he's like investigating it. So that was one check mark of like, okay, she's not a cheerleader.
Well, and I think part of it too has to do with this relationship with Pizza and how Pizza is kind of abandoning everybody because he plays football.
Well, yeah.
So I think he might be happy that she's not a cheerleader because then he sees that there's still hope for them to have a friendship or something along those lines, because she's not part of that crowd that now pizza has abandoned everybody for.
Also, this book is from 98, not 40s. Just so you know.
Oh, it is? I thought are you sure that's not a reprint?
Kind of modern. Well, even the oldest edition is from 98. At least what I'm seeing in here. Yeah, 98.
Oh, my bad. Early this morning, after a night of election following, I opened the ebook and I caught his birth date, which is 1942. Excuse me.
I was thinking because I saw recent pictures when I did my
excuse
it was
me.
happening in current days.
Well, and I thought it was a little bit more current too, because a lot of our high schools changed their mascots just recently because of this same topic.
That was the weirdest connection ever. I didn't even think of this. My kids go to a school where the Chieftains are there. Like, we scream for the Chieftains all the time. That's why one of my questions is like, do you think the New England Patriot guy with the jersey is a realistic depiction of how a middle school fan would be? Like, he's freaking out and he's looking grown up with the Patriots. I mean, probably he is, but like here, there's no Native people here. There's nobody that's not white in Potosi, really. And like, they don't even see it as offensive in the least bit. And like, I don't even know if my Native friends would think that, because growing up with kids that I know I wonder what Lisa would say. Like, my best friend from Green Bay, like, would she be offended by the Chieftains being our mask? Like, does she have is she thinking like Chris, where it's really offensive to him? But the people acting like crazies and doing Tom Hawk Talk and during the game.
That was one of the things that I put in my text to World Connections. Is about how it is a big thing right now of changing mascots and changing names, like recently with the Washington Redskins. And how even though the Redskins didn't change their name, they did change their logo and their mascot. And I mean, like, even one of the schools in my district, we were the Rebels, one of the high schools. And they're taking away the guy mascot because of the idea of the Confederacy and things along those lines.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's good.
I would like to think that fan does not exist.
Me too.
But unfortunately, I think he probably does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He doesn't exist in Potosi. I think that's, and there's no Native people here. And I think that's why we continue to have this like brazen, full-headed Native chief as our, mascot. And when they send out the clothing orders, they still continue. Like, even last year, they had one with like the full head, all feathers, and I was like, that's really offensive. But no one cares because they don't know. They just don't know.
Yeah.
No.
It's just crazy when I saw it. We are the actual Chieftains, just like this team.
And then, like they said in the book, at one time, people thought it was probably a great honor to be a mascot of a school. And then in actuality, as years went on, the idea behind those mascots has changed.
Yeah. So and that guy kind of is making it derogatory, or he's acting like that. And scalp them, saying scalp them, that's not right.
Yeah. No.
All right. Well, I love how you're just adding your connections in as I go through these. It's helpful. So I put in a question at the end of chapter 5 with Chris, and he's reflecting on his father. Just in general, what do you guys think? How he's thinking? Is it Mito or Mito?
Mito?
Yeah. How he's feeling about him? Anything about that you want to share?
Well, and I think that's such a hard thing that Bridge is going to have to deal with because, he's now in middle school. So he's dealing with that. He's dealing with this whole coming of age idea that happens to everybody in middle school. And now he's lost his best friend Pizza, and he can connect that to losing his dad almost. So it's like all of this loss in his life that he's feeling, and how is he dealing with that? The loss of being a child, the loss of his best friend, the loss of his dad, and now this idea of losing the island.
Yeah, the island. I was just going to say.
That sort of goes together with one of my slides on my Illustrator portion. I called it Life, where Chris is just trying to overcome all of the struggles that he has as his mom passes away, his dad's alcoholic. And he begins again to help his aunt with her illness, and then being a big brother and learning everything about his culture. And that's like all of that is just building up. So it sort of connects with that as well.
And then I put in my connections too with the text to text about how he has these conflicting feelings with finding out about his dad coming home from rehab and what happened the last time. And then talking about his dad's loss with the family that died in the house fire and how his dad blames himself for it and things along those lines.
Yeah.
At first I was kind of like, this is very typical of Native families because of that professor I told you guys that I had at Eau Claire who said he didn't know a single Native family that didn't struggle with alcoholism. And I just thought it was like a trend. But when I heard like his poor father has lost his wife and the whole family, like that, all those members of his family in the fire that he was planning to rewire, it could have been a wiring thing, but I just thought I can see why people would like anyone would turn to alcohol with that much sadness. It's like, I could totally understand. So I was like, well, that's kind of something that maybe this rehab will actually help get him, on his feet again, because that's a tremendous amount of hard pain for anyone to deal with. But
oh yeah.
Right.
So that kind of leads into the fact that his father might be able to come back when Douda says, remember this, grandson, everything can come back. It just needs a place to come back to. So I thought of the father on that reference on page 80 that maybe he was kind of hinting at, because he's always talking in riddles, I feel like, and kind of not really saying directly things, but Chris always gets it because he's a genius. So
yeah.
Well, he's got the heart of a chief.
Well, yeah, he did.
I feel like Douda, I want to be Douda as a parent. I think I've said this to you guys before. I just want to be that parent that can like say a few wise words and my kids are like, got it. Right.
Yeah. Right.
And I think it's also just
like Chris.
I know I overly emote naturally and I have 2 boys and it's probably going to be too much for them. So I'm training myself already to just like be short and sweet because it's going to be more impactful.
I think I'm by now.
I also think that Douda really knows, like in all of his wisdom, that the potential of Chris, and he's almost like grooming him. And when he made that statement, I also have been kind of feeling like he's prepping Chris for his own departure from life because he's getting old. Like he's made a couple other comments like, oh, I've got some more time in this body and that kind of thing. But he's a very spiritual man. So I just took that as like, a lot of things. I was still kind of in my whole Illustrator mindset when I was thinking about that stuff because I felt like it was really symbolic of a lot of things to come.
Yes.
For Chris, with, the hardships that he has had, future hardships that he will have, I just feel like Douda's always taking an opportunity to sort of infuse him with like wisdom and comfort and spirituality. So that was one of those times.
I agree. And actually, I'll say connecting to my slides on slide 5, I used Douda as that role model piece for that symbolism within the book. And that how some of the words that I used was just trying to help him to stay connected with his culture, but also just with the real world and how things are all put together. And then just like having like how Chris pays attention to everything that he says. Like Julia, you were just saying, and always paying attention to what he does. And then Doda being the master. So some of the words that I have found, they just were so like powerful to describe Doda, to how he is with Chris and Chris also with Doda. So that's another way that I tried to connect with the book as well.
Well, and I think Doda too is trying to really stop Chris from becoming bitter, because, you know, he doesn't want him to become his father. He wants him to do better. So he's reminding Chris, like, you have to always make sure there's a place for your dad to come back to, you know, and always just instilling that don't let your heart become bitter, always forgive, always be open, things along those lines.
That leads us to chapter 7, where he's like, takes that leadership role and like immediately becomes like namaste, where he makes, we won't make any decisions in our group until we all agree on what we're going to do for our, you know, and we won't talk over each other. We'll have a pencil that we can hand out.
But so similar to how Doda brought the community meeting back to the ground, right? Like he talks about how he started in a prayer and got everybody back to normal, and they had been shouting and so I mean, they're just very similar, and I think Doda knows that, and I think Chris knows it too, because Chris seeks out his time with Doda.
Well, and that was one of like the text to text connections that I made, was how everything keeps coming back to Chris being that chief spirit and being that chief personality, of Doda mentioning about how their family has always done what needs to be done to take care of the tribe, whether that be hunting or whatever that is. And then the auntie talking to the dad about how he hasn't found out yet and it's going to take time. And like, I really connected that to Auntie was talking about Chris and, you know, accepting that heart of a chief and growing into that. And just all of those things. And, you know, his group automatically choosing him to be the leader and him coming up with that talking stick. Like, everything in the book goes back to Chris becoming a leader of some sort in their tribe.
Yeah. Well, that, I guess I could connect also to what you were just saying, Jessica, to the fact of the slide that I have on family, whereas, you know, taking that family piece apart. And Chris has a lot on his shoulders, really, with the health of his aunt right now, and then learning so much from Doda, and then the secret, the hidden secret that he has of his father being the alcoholic, and that he's just there for everyone. I feel like he's a middle school age student, yes, but yet he's living the life of more of a mature adult because of the situations he's going through and the things that happen in his life. But I think it's so cool, though. I want to go back to the Doda being that role model, and just awesome that he can learn so much from him. And I just feel like the school setting that I'm in, I feel like some of those children need that, and they don't have it. It's like they need somebody to guide them in life, to learn from, and to know how to do certain things as they get older and stuff. And it's so cool just to listen and read about their friendship and what he learns from him, and vice versa, how they each learn from each other. I think it's so awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Chapter 7, I just thought Chris is killing it. I mean, what could go wrong for him? He climbs the rope. Everyone's admiring him. He's got the best vocabulary in class. He knows all the words, and he's leading the tribe pretty much, caring for his auntie and remembering to help her take her pills. And then Mito with the treatment coming along. I feel like there's nothing going wrong. I mean, I know we did talk about things that weren't perfect in his life, but I'm getting a little bit nervous about what's to come because of it. Have any of you guys had like a foreshadowing feeling like, oh God, his dad's going to have a relapse or something?
I mean, I kind of figured that his dad's going to have a relapse, especially since they brought up about Christmas time and that relapse that he did have.
Mm-hmm. I feel like maybe that's good enough. He won't have one. Hopefully he doesn't, but well, Renee did say she read ahead and she likes the ending.
I love the ending.
So
I love this book though too. I'm so glad that you asked us to read.
You were kind of like thinking you wouldn't love it.
Right. I'm so glad she asked us to read it because I'm sorry to say, but this might not have been a book that I would have pulled off the shelf and read it. And there are so many teachable moments too if we were to go and teach it with other literacy teachers. Oh my gosh, there's so much. It could be a mentor text. I personally
and relevant with like what we were saying before about how the mascots are becoming an issue at schools, and like it's relevant.
Yes.
Make the Potosi read it.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last thing of discussion on chapter 8, I just kind of went back to Katie and how does Chris feel about Katie, and when the group votes for their leader, how does Chris feel about being chosen? I guess, how does Katie kind of reflect what she's feeling in that moment when they're all working together on their project? Did we lose Julia? We might have.
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can.
Did it seem like I was frozen? I was just thinking.
No, letter J on the screen, and I didn't know if that had some impact. I did cut out, but I hope it didn't affect the recording. It said it was still recording, but
yeah, the recording was still up in the corner.
Wow.
Yeah. So I can talk since you inadvertently called on me. Just kidding. No, I'm just
for volunteering.
Yeah. Well, so we touched on how we think Chris feels about Katie, right? I think we kind of all agree, but I really felt like I felt like he was caught off guard by being chosen, but I think in that moment he was also caught off guard by a bunch of stuff. Like he suddenly was more mature. He was doing better in school. His grades were better. He always knew he was smart and school came easy to him, but maybe he wasn't applying himself. And so like he was better in school and he got chosen as this group leader and his teachers were kind of relying on him. And then the coach also recognized him for his physical strength. And it was like, he was growing and maturing with such ease that he didn't even know he was until these things were happening as a result of them. So that was sort of one of them. And I felt like he took it on with like such grace. And again, going back to that whole like Doda as a role model, Chris really took it on in like a very diplomatic way and did a great job of pushing them along and sort of laying the norms for the group. And so I thought he did a great job with it.
I agree. And I think that's where, like I was saying earlier, is that he's a little bit more mature in the areas of being a middle schooler. So he did take on that role very well. And he went with it. And he's, as you read on, he did a phenomenal job with it and how he grew from it as well. Unbelievable. And I love the topic that they chose.
I know. So perfect.
That was taking a step in itself.
I'm excited to see what's going to happen. Don't tell me. I'm excited to see how this play out.
Yeah.
So that's the last discussion item was what predictions do you have, Renee? Obviously, you're not going to make one.
No.
Did either of you finish that?
I hope everybody likes the ending as well as I did. I mean, it really all just came together very smoothly and awesome.
Well, I'm going to appreciate a good ending. I do. Did you both finish?
I did not finish yet.
I haven't.
Okay. But what are your predictions for you?
I think that the tribe is going to get rid of their current chief and not necessarily replace him, obviously, because Chris is way too young. but kind of like Chris is going to really step into that leadership role and take on more of a position in the tribal community instead of like having that separation that he's feeling right now. And I don't think the casino is going to happen.
Maybe his dad will come back and be the chief because they said they need him. They kept saying that in the beginning, like we need him.
Yep, and he's in rehab. And he's in rehab, and hopefully he'll be able to stay in rehab this time too. You know, he seems to have a different type of outlook too when he was calling and having those conversations.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, okay, I'm going to try it this time and I really want to do it. So hopefully that too.
And like with his friend Anthony, will they become friends again? Will they figure out what that rift is? And
I don't think so. I think him and Pizza are just going to go their separate ways.
Yeah, I think so too. I do think something bad is going to. Yeah, I do think something bad is going to happen with either Auntie or Doda. There's got to be a loss.
Their health is.
Isn't that funny? I thought the same thing as reading. Why do we think that though? Why?
High blood pressure.
I mean, we should be thinking like a book can end, with all of this happening. A book can end with a happy note, right? But I had that same thought the whole time I was reading, and I didn't like that feeling that I had.
Well, that's why I said chapter 7 is everything just too perfect that
yes,
got to be something bad coming because everything's just rainbows and sunshine right now.
Yeah,
I know.
He's got brawn. He can't lose. Like I don't know. What that's probably why you're thinking there's going to be something. Well, what's the conflict? Otherwise, there's no plot. Just the fact that they want to build a casino, or the fact that some people don't, and some people that they are chieftains. It's a little bit. Do you think they'll rename the team? I don't know if it's going to go that far, but
no, I don't think they will.
Oh.
Renee is trying so hard to not give things away.
I'm trying to sit still. I am so excited for our next conversation. So hurry up and read.
Did I start recording? You want to add anything else? Like Julie, did you want to add anything about your role?
I mean, I didn't do a whole lot of chiming in just because there was one piece that connected to what we were talking about, which is in my text to world connections. I
didn't share yours during the presentation if you want me to.
That's okay, because I didn't pipe up about it because we were sort of moving on. So it just didn't feel like an organic time to chime in. So I will tie back to, we were talking about, and we've talked about this a lot throughout this book, that, what is it about Native Americans and substance abuse that go together? And today we sort of came to the point of like, well, there's a lot of hardship, right? Like there really is. And so my text to world connection was just originally about substance abuse as a whole in our country, because it really is such an issue. And I started to get a handle on some of the stats, like the actual stats. And, it's really like shocking. And especially how many young people start to suffer from addiction problems at a young age. And it just goes to show, what a real problem it is and a real illness it is, and why it's so hard for people to overcome it. I mean, it's not like it's just a season in your life necessarily. And so I came across the American Addiction Center website, and there was all kinds of information, and there was information about Native Americans' substance abuse disorders and why. And it was a lot of the things that we talked about, like historical trauma, violence, poverty, unemployment, low levels of education at times, racism, discrimination. So, they are an oppressed population, and we do not take care of them, even though they are native to our country. And it's just very unfortunate. So from that, as I thought along those lines and, sort of found some of the actual numbers and stats and causes for why Native Americans tend to go down that path. It also, and then, those reasons, it got me thinking about the Dakota Access Pipeline and just how we so take for granted the native lands in our country and the people and culture that reside there. I mean, it's just so incredibly heartbreaking and unfortunate. So, I can understand why, like you all said too, like you can understand why they have gone down those paths because life is hard at times. So,
yeah, and with saying that, the way that the author portrays Chris, you sort of are rooting for him in the book to hopefully say that he's not going to go down that path, because he has those role models in his life, and he is grasping on to mature topics and then be able to do some problem solving and so on. So you sort of get started rooting for him, like, yeah, he's going to be one of those that changes the culture and is one that everybody looks up to. So yeah, it's sad. I didn't know those statistics. And
they are staggering.
It's sad. Yeah. And
it's super sad.
I didn't know either, though, when Carrie brought it up the first conversation we had, that they had a difficulty with alcoholism. So with you connecting more with that, it's sort of like I'm more intrigued now with it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And then you think about something like the Dakota Access Pipeline, and it's like, these people are abused by other Americans.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so there you go, right? Like, it's very, very poor treatment, and it's just super unfortunate. So,
yeah.
And then text to text connections, I haven't, it took me a little while to think about it. And then I was chuckling to myself today because I really connected this book to the two most recently read books, which is one of them is This Is My America by Kim Johnson, which is a YA book. And then that's a recently read. And then I'm currently reading for this class for one of my annotations, Refugee, which I love.
I love that book.
So good. But really, I mean, three very different books, but all of them have young characters from oppressed populations who are just like way wiser than their time. And they really take care of their parents and struggle in the struggle of like justice and freedom, and just have a really clear picture of their path. So in This Is My America, it's about a girl who works with a non-for-profit. She like harasses this non-for-profit lawyer to prove her father's innocence in a murder trial that he was convicted of, that he was innocent. And he was very close to his death sentence, and he got out of prison. The Refugee book, we all know what that's about, right? It's the three characters who are also very connected with each other. I mean, their character traits are so similar, but they're these feisty, fearless, awesome kids that are like watching out for their families. So I really, especially with that book, feel like they are similar to Chris. Like, they know that they deserve better. They understand that they're oppressed. They know what they need to do. They watch out for their families, and they like push their families towards a better life. So it was, like I said, at first I was like having a hard time thinking of other books I've read that are similar to this one, but these are very much connected.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what a great theme to have, and to do, like, I don't know if you guys ever do book ladders, but that would be an awesome book ladder to create and have kids like, okay, if you've read this one, you're really going to connect with the characters with this one, and then so on. So I think
and it kind of
what a great idea.
Goes up on levels too, because you have a young adult at the top, maybe, or whatever.
Yeah.
You could get that whole list to a young adult, and then they could read them all. Actually, another good thing to put in that list is A Different Pond. And I was reading that as an annotation.
Totally.
It's a great book for that connection to that. So, and we
love that book in our house.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Pictures,
that's a very, very well read book in my house.
You know that it's like a graphic novel. A graphic novelist is the illustrator of the children's book. It's a picture book, but the illustrations like make you feel like you can smell the smell of the pond and like feel the way the dad like is crinkling. Like it's just so alive. The pictures are. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a simple story. And my now 5-year-old, I got it for him when he was 3, and it was one of the ones that we read, 1,000 times. And it's such a simple story, but when you really think about it, because of the illustrations, it's such a deep dive too at the same time, because of those like close-ups of emotion.
And
so
it's like,
really,
I don't know, our kids or some kids around here would go on a fishing trip as like this fun outing with the dad. And this is like out of need and necessity that they're doing it. So it kind of is a little bit of a juxtaposition to the joy and fun of a fishing trip on a Saturday morning, where these people are like, if we catch fish, we'll have food for dinner. It's not quite the same at all.
No.
Right.
And even just the whole title, like The Different Pond being a pond in Vietnam where he fished with his brother, but then also they had to fight in a war every day. So it kind of like just one line about that, but it's profound.
Yeah. So the other connection, I'll just say quick, it's kind of a long slide, so I'll gloss over, but it was my text to self. And so thinking about, Chris laying in bed right before his father calls, and he is kind of tossing around all these big topics in his head. And he's like, I wish my dad were here because he would be the one that would help me understand all this stuff. And I totally connected to that, because that is my dad 100%, like just really good dad, the one that like just always knew when something was on my mind and I could hash it out with him. And then furthermore, he talks about his dad's alcoholism, and he says it's like one of those body snatcher movies where the person you know and love has been replaced by some cold alien being and just seems to be or being that just used to be your brother, your husband, or your father. So my dad suffered from Parkinson's for 10 years, and he just died in August. But it's that same feeling, because in so many ways, like his lively presence and affection, his affection was always there, but that huge presence was gone, but he was still there. Yeah. So it was that shell of a person. And anyway, so that whole thing, that whole feeling that Chris has about his dad's alcoholism kind of taking him away emotionally and cognitively, but not physically. Very similar to how it was losing my dad over the years. So, and
that's a sad one.
Yeah, it is, but it definitely struck me. And then there was just like, we touched on Chris's growth, like how he had this like spurt of physical and emotional and social growth. And
yes,
I definitely have had those as a kid where, my mom would comment like, you really grew so much this summer in so many ways, and I'd be like, what? I don't know. But then as an adult, I really like could feel that a lot more, like my perspective would just change on something, or I'd not care so much about something, or I'd stop worrying about something that used to preoccupy me. And you know, as you get older, you're like, forget about it. So yeah. So those were my texts to self. Those ones are always easy to come by. So that's it.
Good cognition for a kid.
Yes.
I don't remember like feeling like, oh, it's become a.
Well, it was more like, you know, when I turned 30, I remember like just shedding a bunch of stuff that didn't matter anymore, you know, and then again at 35, I was like, I just feel so much lighter because I feel like I don't care about the dumb stuff that doesn't matter or that I don't have control over or what people think of me, like things like that.
Right.
As a kid, it was more my mom pointing it out, and I'd be like, but as a parent, you now I know that, right? Because I have my own, and my husband and I comment on that all the time. Like, wow, he really has developed in the past couple of months, or he's like a big kid now. So
yeah.
See it with the tiny kids more, and yourself when you're 30 too, probably is easier.
Right.
Like in high school, I don't remember having revelations like that at all.
No, I think we develop those as we get older outside of the school world. And we're forced to be in the
school world.
Yeah. Right now we're back in school. Yeah. This is good school. This is fun.
Understand what we're learning on.
Okay,
well, I think I'll stop recording.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Then when